Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing swell. UFC 319 is headlined by Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev in what will be the biggest fight of the year by far. Because the only fights that could have been bigger, literally, would have been Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But in order for us to get that, Jon has to make a miraculous comeback, stop living like he is on a GTA server, come back to the UFC, at which point Dana White welcomes and uses him like you would your ex, gets rid of Cyril Gane the same way Arman Tsarukyan is getting rid of his title opportunities, and then basically have Tom versus Jon. Now that would probably been more fair than what we have right now in the heavyweight division. I don't want to get too deep into this, but after Cyril Gane beat Alexander Volkov, according to no one, Dana White himself said he was going to take care of Alexander Volkov. So he gave Volkov Jelton Almeida and he gave Cyril Gane a chance to fight for the heavyweight championship. Now, if that is getting taken care of, I am happy to die alone. I am in fact in no need of being taken care of. And the only other fight that could have been bigger than Dricus versus Khamzat would have been Ilya versus Islam. But Ilya already beat Charles Oliveira. We don't know when Ilya is going to fight next because we don't even know who his opponents will be or opponent will be. But I mean, at this point, throw two people in there. I think Ilya still wins. And Islam's probably going to fight JDM in November. So Dricus versus Khamzat will be the biggest fight of the year. And I'm here to tell you it's probably a little bit deeper than that, Daddy Dricus. Because I think this is one of the biggest middleweight fights in a very, very long time. And I'll tell you why. But before I get into the video, just a friendly reminder, if you enjoy it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell. I would really appreciate it. It'd be awesome. You're awesome. Let's go. Now, the reason why Dricus versus Khamzat will be one of the biggest middleweight fights of all time is not because Dricus as a champion is undefeated within the UFC, taking on the likes of Khamzat, who as a contender is undefeated within mixed martial arts full stop. It is because of the chaos and ungodly devastation both men have left in their wake up until this point. Because a couple of years ago, we had Izzy versus Alex, where Izzy was undefeated in his mixed martial arts career, taking on Alex Pereira, who was undefeated within the UFC, getting knockout win after knockout win over the likes of Michelitis, over the likes of Sean Strickland, and Alex Pereira fought Israel Adesanya in a fight which was absolutely massive because we all knew that Israel Adesanya, in a kickboxing setting, got laid out like a doormat against Alex Pereira, and we thought if Alex chased them to the UFC and they fought in a mixed martial arts setting, what would happen? We had our answer. And then we had the opposite of our answer when they fought once again. Now, I give you that is massive. But if we look at Dricus and Khamzat, it is way, way different than Izzy versus Alex. Because from the get-go, the UFC wanted this. They pushed for this narrative. It took Alex, I think, 3 or 4 fights. I think 3 if I'm not mistaken, to fight Izzy for the middleweight championship. So it was something that everyone wanted immediately because at the time, Izzy felt unbeatable. Cruising past the likes of Jared Cannonier and Paulo Costa, Robert Whittaker. He was busy lapping people. And people thought, well, we need something to come up against Izzy that could potentially beat him because both men stylistically are the same. We knew going into that fight that you could bet your uncle and your cousin that you would not see a takedown being attempted in that fight. Both men have too much pride They want to show that they are superior in a striking setting. That's what we had when we saw Izzy versus Alex. And a couple years prior to that, we had Izzy taking on Robert Whittaker. And given it was big. But when Izzy arrived at the UFC, the level of competition, it didn't feel as good as it is right now. Need I remind you that Israel Adesanya became interim champion by beating Kelvin Gastelum. Now sure, if I say Kelvin Gastelum, you might think, Donnie, sure. But when I say Kelvin Gastelum, it's not screaming champion or number one contender. Izzy beats Kelvin. Prior to that, he beat Marvin Vettori narrowly. Prior to that, he fought Anderson Silva when Anderson came back to the UFC. So it's not like this path of absolute destruction and chaos and just this finishing phenomenon that we have when we look at both Dricus and Khamzat. It's not just one, it's both. But Izzy fought Rob, and at the time, Rob was considered one of the best middleweights of all time. Robert Whittaker, who prior to fighting Izzy, fought Yoel Romero twice. Now, it was big because of Yoel Romero. Because Yoel Romero is not real. Yoel Romero is something that fathers tell their children. It's a story that fathers tell their children to behave, and basically a story that wives would tell their husbands in order for them to behave. Because Yoel Romero is not human. He was made in a lab, and I don't even think his parents are human. I think they crossbreed a couple of things, and he popped out and said, Michael Bisping, I love you. And then we basically had Yoel Romero, one of the scariest specimens to ever have and ever walk on this planet. And Rob beat him twice. But if we look at Izzy, and if we look at his career within the UFC after becoming champion, cruised past Jared Cannonier in what was a somewhat lackluster performance, especially for Israel Adesanya's standards. Then his fight with Yoel Romero, where honestly I've seen romantic movies with more action than that fight. And then obviously had the fight with Rob once again, which wasn't anything to write home about. Had the fight against Marvin Vettori once again as champion, and it came to a point where Izzy, like I previously said, was lapping the division. But it wasn't spectacularly, because had he done it spectacularly, there wouldn't necessarily be a rematch. Now I get it, he knocked out Rob when he became champion. It was insane. Style bender, dancing inside of the octagon after knocking Rob down not once but twice, celebrated, and then we thought, this guy is insane, and he is. And then we had Paulo Costa as well, and that was also insane. But then from then on, it became underwhelming. And prior to Robert Whittaker, we had Anderson Silva. Now I know in between we had Chris Weidman's, and we had Luke Rockhold's, we had Michael Bisping's, but Anderson was probably the one where if you think massive middleweight fight, you probably think Anderson Silva. Now sure, Bisping versus GSP was big, it didn't have this feel. And Anderson, when he fought Rich Franklin, when he fought Nate Marquardt, listen, if you don't know, Nate Diaz is not the scariest Nate to ever fight inside of the UFC. Go Google Nate Marquardt. Once again, no testing was ever done within the UFC at that point, allegedly. But I can almost say that as a fact, because Nate Marquardt looked like he was being built by someone. He didn't pop out of a woman. He in fact basically got put together by bricks. And if we look at Anderson Silva versus Rich Franklin, Nate Marquardt, even against Vitor Belfort, big fights, but it didn't feel like this. And you know, Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, where Chael won because Chael has never lost a fight, it was big, but it wasn't this. If we look at Khamzat's career, if we look at Dricus' career, when Khamzat started, he fought. Now, I'm going to go through both men's careers within the UFC, and you'll understand just what I mean when I say it. If I had to say aura, it's this. It is massive. And it kind of feels like the East versus the West, but South Africa is, if you don't know geography class, we're on the eastern side of the Greenwich. So we would be East as well. So East versus East, but we feel a little bit more Western. So, but, okay. So Khamzat Chimaev's career within the UFC starts when he fought John Phillips. Okay, beats John Phillips via a DAS. Then he makes a turnaround. What do I mean? He beats John Phillips. A week later, he fights once again inside of the UFC, making history as a guy with the quickest turnaround ever within the UFC to fight once again. Steps in on short notice. And he beats Rhys McKee. Now, I'm going to give you a stat, which sounds like I'm sucking facts out of my ass. But I'm not. And if I could, it would be awesome. I would genuinely, I would do it. So out of Khamzat's next, I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of Khamzat's next 5 opponents, including Rhys McKee, the only fighter who had a significant strike against him was Gilbert Burns. Rhys McKee didn't even attempt a single strike against Khamzat. Khamzat takes him down, beats him via ground and pound. Not a single strike was landed on Rhys McKee's behalf, or well, via Rhys McKee. Gerald Meerschaert, Khamzat knocks him out in the first round. Gerald Meerschaert didn't land a strike. Li Jingliang, the Leech, same thing happened, where no strikes were landed from Li Jingliang. Then he fights Gilbert in what already was absolutely mind-boggling. If we think about it, we have this guy in Khamzat who has beaten, good fighters, let's say average fighters, and now he's facing Gilbert Burns, top 5 ranked welterweight, and Khamzat Chimaev goes into that fight a massive favorite. Does that make sense? Absolutely not at all. And Khamzat beats Gilbert Burns. He does have some resistance from Gilbert Burns in what was a close fight. We saw Khamzat get rocked for the first time inside the UFC. We saw Khamzat be mortal when he fought Gilbert Burns. But then after that, the devastation just kept on going. Because after that, he fights Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland doesn't land a single strike. Khamzat submits him. After that, he fights Kamaru Usman at a catch weight, closer to Khamzat's weight than Kamaru's weight, where it was an advantage for Khamzat because he couldn't make welterweight. They fought at a catch weight. Kamaru Usman steps on short notice, and this was a massive flex for Kamaru Usman, which means a lot. If we think about it, it is a flex for Kamaru Usman to step in on short notice and fight someone who has never fought for the belt, who has never contested for a number 1 contender spot to fight for a belt. Khamzat wins, but Kamaru survives. And people say Kamaru is a stud. Kamaru Usman, who is the second greatest welterweight of all time, survives against Khamzat. Kamaru gets the praise. That is how insane Khamzat is and has been and probably will be within the UFC. So he beats Usman. Then he fights Robert Whittaker. And he basically submits Robert Whittaker in the first round by cranking his head and breaking his teeth via his squeezing, talk that he gets in his, He breaks Robert Whittaker's teeth and he wins that fight. And now he is fighting Dricus Du Plessis. Do you understand when I say 5 of his opponents didn't register one significant strike and Khamzat beat all of them? 5 of his opponents didn't register a single significant strike. Khamzat beats all of them convincingly. Not one. Imagine if you go into a fight. I guarantee if you and I were fighting and we knew we had to get one significant strike, we would probably get it. As soon as you fight Khamzat, when you see him shoot, just throw out a leg. Just throw out maybe a jab. We get one. We win. That's it. None of these guys got one. Which is a testament to how unrelenting, well, I don't know what I said there. How unrelenting Khamzat is in what he wants to do. The fact that he basically wants to impose his will, he's going to do it. Everybody knows he is going to wrestle and you can't do a damn thing about it. So that's Khamzat's side of the story. Now going to Dricus Du Plessis. Starts off inside of the UFC. Now when we watched, it was a big deal because prior to Dricus, the only South African that we saw within the UFC, from my understanding, was Gareth McClellan, who was big on the regional scene in South Africa. He went to the UFC, but he didn't make it. Okay, didn't really impress inside of the UFC. I think he won 1 out of 4 fights. Gareth got cut, but Gareth was really good. To basically put it and give you some perspective, Gareth McClellan has a win over Dricus Du Plessis. Dricus has 2 losses professionally. Gareth McClellan is one of them. He made it to the UFC and then basically got cut. So when Dricus made it was a big deal for South Africans because we had someone representing South Africa inside the UFC. Now, did we think we will sit here today? I'm going to be honest, no. I didn't. Because I knew Dricus was good. He was good inside of the EFC. We saw a couple of his fights at KSW. We knew Dricus was good, but we didn't think he was this good because of how unorthodox he is. Because of the only fighter we had inside of the UFC was Gareth McClellan, and he whiffed. But then Dricus made his debut against Marcus Perez, wins by a knockout. We lose our absolute shit. Dricus wins. It is insane. A big day for South Africans. And it was beautiful. And I still remember where I was watching it with a couple of friends. And you might think, well, I have friends. I did. And then Dricus Du Plessis fights Trevin Giles, knocks out Trevin Giles as well. And then he fights Brad Tavares in a fight which was a barn burner. Both men battered, bruised, saw a bit of everything, saw a lot of strikes, saw Dricus and his unorthodox style, saw Brad Tavares with his durability, the fact that he is so relentless, and Dricus ended up winning that fight via decision. And then he fights Darren Till. Or did he fight? Yeah, fought Darren Till, beat Darren Till. And then he fights Derek Brunson, beats Brunson. And at that time, there was a compelling narrative where a lot of people saw Dricus and thought he has one massive weakness, a glaring weakness, his cardio. And we later found out why. Because Dricus didn't really have an effective, didn't breathe effectively out of his nose. So his nose wasn't really doing its job. And neither is John Jones's nose. Probably wish John Jones had a Dricus problem. And we would have had, better stories within the UFC. But Dricus was incapable of really using his nose, breathe through his nose, and everybody knows that wasn't intentional. Everybody knows that you have to breathe through your nose and in order to not tire as quickly. So we saw Dricus, we saw the way he fought, and we thought glaring weakness, cardio. If you push this guy to the limit, he will probably break. And then Dricus got nose surgery. They basically threw things into his nose, opened the hole, and I don't know how it works. But after that, he looked unstoppable. He looked like something out of a movie. fought Robert Whittaker as a 3-1 underdog, and everybody said Robert Whittaker wins via however he wants. And Dricus Du Plessis knocks out Robert Whittaker in the second round, drops him with a jab, and then just goes and pounds Robert Whittaker, body shots, hooks, and finishes it via ground and pound. And at this point in time, people started to realize this guy is a massive problem. Because the fact that he is unorthodox, it isn't a weakness. It is in fact a positive. It is a strength of Dricus Du Plessis, because it is very difficult to prepare for someone who fights that way. Someone who doesn't necessarily use the fundamentals, has awkward foot movement, has awkward head movement, walks forward like a zombie, has power that could turn off your lights, and he basically throws unorthodox shots. And then he gets his title opportunity against Sean Strickland. Beat Sean Strickland. It was tight. What do? They have Dricus versus Izzy because Africa needs a king. It needs a brother. Dricus says, I'll be that guy. He beats Israel Adesanya via submission. The first submission loss Izzy has ever had in his life. The first submission loss Izzy has had in his life. In mixed martial arts, obviously. And then Dricus rematches Sean Strickland and puts a beating on Sean Strickland. So both men basically just winning via finishing their opponent, but it is different. Khamzat doing it via his wrestling, extremely one-dimensional, but he's so good, he doesn't need a different dimension. That doesn't make sense. But Khamzat is so good that his wrestling is enough. And what we thought would be Dricus' problem is a weakness that a lot of people see in Khamzat. Will his cardio be able to hold up? When this goes to rounds 3, 4, and 5, will he be able to go with Dricus? Will he be able to strike with Dricus? If the wrestling isn't working, if we get into a Gilbert Burns scenario with Khamzat and Dricus, is Khamzat walking out of that fight as a champion? Now, I'm not here to answer that. I'm just saying that it is somewhat interesting to see that is the thing that we are hammering on Khamzat, and it's not the thing that people point out when talking about Dricus and his potential weaknesses within the UFC. Because as of right now, it doesn't really feel like Dricus has a weakness. Now I am biased. Okay, I am biased. I am not in fact non-biased. I am biased, but Dricus' wrestling is really good. It's not Khamzat level wrestling, but his wrestling is good. Now, he has been taken down in his UFC career, but he was able to stand up immediately. He is way stronger than anything Khamzat has fought up until this point. He is a bigger frame, he is a stronger guy, and he has knockout power. Not a lot of guys Khamzat has fought has knockout power. So Khamzat is somewhat able to be reckless in entries. Whenever he goes for takedowns, he can be reckless because he knows there isn't really something that he needs to look out for, a potential threat coming from the other way. And I think what makes this so big is Khamzat Chimaev, and this might sound insane. I'm comparing Khamzat to Khabib. Now, before you say that I need to put down the light bulb and stop smoking it, the difference between Khamzat and Khabib is, okay, let's just say we think Khabib's a better wrestler, okay? But I'm talking about popularity. Khabib didn't enter the UFC and immediately became a force. Immediately became this wrecking ball, this unstoppable force, this aura of invincibility. Even though he might have been that, there wasn't a lot of eyes on Khabib. Not even from, Chechnya or, the Russian side of it. Khabib was in the lightweight division, a division that was very, very thick at the time, had a lot of studs, had a lot of donnies, so it was difficult to make name within the lightweight division. So it took Khabib a long time within the lightweight division before he genuinely became a star, before people actually saw how good Khabib was. He beat the likes of Gleison Tibau, a lot of guys that Khabib ran through it, only up until the point where he beat Ally Aquinta and was set to face Conor McGregor. We saw, holy shit, this guy's insane. This guy feels unbeatable. This guy has this aura where he isn't well-rounded. He basically is just a wrestler, that's it. But he doesn't need anything else. His wrestling is so dominant that he could basically just put all of his chips into that and win. That's how good Khabib was. But it was only up until the Conor fight, after beating Ally Aquinta, prior to that beating Edson Barbosa and beating the likes of, I think, Michael Johnson as well. We didn't see Khabib as this thing, this big superstar with this unbeatable aura and this figure that is just undeniable. We saw that somewhat immediately with Khamzat. Because of the quick turnaround, everybody was notifying people. People that was watching UFC notified their mates. Listen, did you see this guy? He was making a quick turnaround, 7 days, no training camp, short notice. He fought last weekend, he's fighting again, and he ragdolls his opponent and immediately becomes a superstar. And then continues to do that with basically every single guy he then fought. So from the start, Khamzat has been this figure that will inevitably be at the top, where we didn't have that with Khabib. So it is huge when I say Dricus versus Khamzat will probably be one of the biggest fights in middleweight history, because we have both guys that are genuinely devastating. Khamzat via his wrestling, Dricus via whatever works, via not making sense at all, via a handstand headbutt. Both men who have a finishing rate of 60-70% plus, which is very rare inside of the UFC because you're fighting the best fighters in the world. Both men imposing their will, both men basically just ragdolling their opponents, and now we get to the point where it's the unstoppable force in Khamzat Chimaev versus the immovable object in Dricus Du Plessis. And it's gonna be insane.